All right, welcome to Communicate Using Science, Not Speculation. Today, we're talking about three analogies that I have that I roll in together. And they're not just my analogies. You may have heard about them, but I kind of roll things in together in a unique way, which is a cake, an iceberg, and the three lives. Yes, it's wacky to combine a cake and an iceberg and three lives. And you may be wondering, what are even the three lives? Maybe you've heard about this concept, maybe you haven't. We're going to dive into that today. The thing that you can do at the end of watching this training session is you'll know two really quick things. Number one, you'll know how to calm an angry person quickly in seconds, and you'll know how to create trust with someone, even if they have been angry, but certainly if they're not angry, how do you create trust with someone quickly? You've probably heard of the concept. It was developed in the 80s called know, like, and trust. If you've been in sales or you've been an entrepreneur at any point in your life, you've probably heard, well, for someone to do business with you, they have to know you, they have to like you, they have to trust you. And that today is no longer true. Maybe it was in the 80s, maybe it was in the 90s, but it is certainly not true today. And you might be thinking, well, Carrie, what changed? What changed in the last really 5 to 7 years? But you can trace it back to truly major shifts at the beginning of the pandemic. Was trust being shattered, not just broken, but shattered throughout the world. We had shutdowns, and then there was, well, we don't need to have shutdowns. We have to wear masks. No, you don't have to wear masks. Trust the science, but then the science wasn't always accurate, wasn't always proven, wasn't always true what we were being told, at least in the United States. So people today are more confrontational. They are more on edge. They are operating more in fear and more likely to have confrontations than ever before. The United States certainly is greatly polarized, mainly because of politics, but in a lot of different areas. And so when we look at this whole know, like, and trust, first of all, you have to understand that knowing, getting to know someone, getting to like someone, building a relationship like that takes time. If you're involved in sales at any level, and quite frankly, if you're a parent, you're involved in sales regardless of what your job is that you bring in money with. If you're a parent, you're involved in sales, getting your child to go to bed when you want them to go to bed, to eat their vegetables, to not hit the dog, to do their homework, any number of things, be nice to their brother, be nice to their sister. Everything is involved in sales. As a police officer for 30 years, I retired from the San Diego Police Department as a sergeant after 30 years in law enforcement. I jokingly say, but truthfully at the same time, that I was in sales for 30 years. I just sold people into handcuffs without resisting. My goal was I didn't want to get into a fight with someone because someone always got hurt, and oftentimes multiple people got hurt, and I didn't want to get hurt, and I didn't want to have my uniform torn or bloodied or dirty or anything like that. Plus, there was always much more paperwork when you got into a fight. It was a lot easier to talk somebody into handcuffs, to get them to comply without resisting, without having to use force. And quite frankly, that's the best way to do law enforcement work. But regardless of what level of selling you're involved in, the one thing that's needed today is trust. And you can create trust with someone quickly. Now, are you going to, if you make a sale, you have a new client, are you going to get to know them and like them? Yes, but that comes after the sale. The only thing someone needs today to do business with you is they need to trust you. So with that concept in mind, whether we're dealing with business, a professional relationship, if we're talking a personal relationship, if we're talking a romantic relationship, regardless of what it is, trust is critical. When you think about every relationship that ends, you can come back to trust being a key factor in why that relationship ended. Well, they didn't treat me well. Okay, so you ended the relationship because you were not trusting that they would treat you well in the future. Or husband and wife, she cheated on me. She'll cheat on me again. Okay, so you don't trust your wife. Anytime that there's been a rift in a relationship, you need to reestablish trust. So today we're going to be talking about key factors that go into this trust building mystical, magical thing that happens. And I'm going to teach you the neuroscience, the personality science, and the core human drivers behind that. As a quick review, what we want to be able to talk about today is these concepts. First of all, I want you to read this just to yourself and think about where the emphasis on the capitalized word is. The people don't see things as they are. People see things as they are. And another way to say that, to flip the script, is we don't see things as they are. We see things as we are. And this goes to the concept of perception and perspective. We have a perception of events. We absolutely 100% understand what is going on in front of us. And yet we're not looking through the lens that the other person is looking through. And until we do that, until we look at the situation from their perspective, understanding the things that they know and the way they see things, the way they perceive things, when we look from their perspective, then we can understand the situation better. Because intuitively, we don't do that. Now let's talk about the neuroscience real quick of the brain. This is foundational to everything that we do at IDEA, the International De-Escalation Association. Now, your brain can only be in one of two states. It can be in an executive state or it can be in survival state. That's it. Executive state, survival state, just one of those two, or shifting back and forth. Now, like a teeter-totter on a children's playground, you're in one or the other. And this teeter-totter example works in so many different things when we're talking about conflict resolution. As an example, when we're talking about ego and self-esteem. Someone with very high self-esteem, ego is very low. When someone's ego is very high, they have very low self-esteem. They're inversely proportional. When you understand about ego and self-esteem, when you understand about executive state and survival state, you understand how their brain is working, how your brain is working, then we begin to understand the situation better. Now, to understand the neuroscience, just very briefly, we're going to talk about three parts of the brain. And if you play along with me, it'll help you remember these different parts of the brain. First thing I want you to do is reach up and put your hand on your forehead. It doesn't matter left or right hand. Put the palm on your forehead like you're checking to see if you have a fever. You're now right on the other side of your skull is what's known as the PFC or prefrontal cortex. You can relax your hand. The prefrontal cortex is where all of our executive functions come from. Our creativity, our ability to problem solve, our ability to have rational and logical thinking, our ability to access memory, most memory, comes from the prefrontal cortex being active and alert and energized. The power is onto it, if you will. Now, take one of your index fingers, either one, it doesn't matter. Reach back and find the knot on the back of your head. Feel that knot and then drop in. And first of all, that knot on the back of your head, that's C1, cervical spine vertebrae number 1. That's the top of your spinal cord. And if you drop into the notch right below that, and don't do this part, but if you were to push your finger in about 2 to 3 inches and wiggle your finger, you'd be tickling your hindbrain. You can relax your hands and your arms. Now, the hindbrain, sometimes it's called the croc brain or the lizard brain or the reptile brain. It's the oldest part of the brain. And it's responsible for our ability to react quickly to save our lives or to prevent or limit injury. As an example of last week, I was reaching into the oven and my daughter had gotten these little silicone that kind of looks like a little Pac-Man. Bought them on Amazon, and you're supposed to be able to reach in and grab a tray, the cookie sheet or something, and you don't have to have the full oven mitt. Well, the problem is it only covers your knuckles, it doesn't cover the back of your hand. So I reach in, I'm trying out these new things, and the back of my hand touches the wire rack above, and I yank my hand back and I run over the sink and I'm running water on it. Now, that is a hindbrain reaction, very quick. Didn't have to think about it. I snatched my hand back. I didn't have to wait for my prefrontal cortex to process the smell of burning flesh or the heat that was gathering on my hand to go, oh, I should pull my hand away. Now, obviously, different parts of our brain fulfill different functions. Now, the last part of the brain that we're going to talk about, I want you to take both of your index fingers and I want you to put them just above your ear and just forward of your ear. And if you've ever seen the show Mork and Mindy, it was a US-based situational comedy back in the 70s, 80s timeframe. You would see Mork going, nano, nano. So if you're familiar with that show, you'll always remember where your amygdala is, the special part of the brain I'm going to talk about next. And you can relax your hands. If you were to push in 2 to 3 inches, wiggle your finger, you'd be tickling what I call Amy. Amygdala, and the phonetic spelling is there. You can break it down into Amy G Dala. Easy way to remember it. The amygdala is the fear center of the brain. It's doing one thing. It's keeping us alive. It's asking one question 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Am I safe? Am I safe? Now, the amazing thing about the amygdala is it never sleeps. That's why you wake up at 2:30 in the morning. You're like, what was that noise? And I jokingly say, Amy, I call the amygdala Amy for short. Amy doesn't have opposable thumb. She can't hold on to a gun to keep you safe as you clear the house for the potential home invader. Can't hold on to a baseball bat. Can't call a phone, dial a phone for 911. Amy can't do that. Amy doesn't have legs. She isn't ambulatory. So she wakes you up to carry her around to make sure that there's no one in your house that shouldn't be in your house. And that creaky noise or the slamming that you heard, you find out it's just a cupboard door that the hinge finally caught and closed. And should have done that hours ago, but it chose 2:30 in the morning to make that noise. So you go back up and Amy is, I'm safe. And the other thing that Amy does is another way to ask the same question of, am I safe, is, are you a friend or a foe? And really what Amy is looking for is not so much, are you a friend, but are you an enemy? Are you an enemy? Because if you're an enemy, then I need to do things that keep me safe. If you're not an enemy, I can relax. Now, another way to look at this is if you picture a T intersection, a road that ends in a T intersection, and all of your 6 senses, and yes, I said 6, because sometimes the hair stands up on the back of our neck and we say or do things that protect us, like putting your hand out and stopping your spouse or your child from crossing the street, and all of a sudden a car goes speeding by that you never saw. You just knew to stop them. You don't know how you knew, you just knew. Or maybe you slow down and all of a sudden traffic ahead of you comes to a complete stop. And you're like, wow, I didn't even see the brake lights, but I just felt like something was going on up there. Our 6 senses, the things that go on in our brains that we can't explain, that happen on a subconscious, unconscious, non-conscious level. All of this information is coming into this T intersection. It has to go left or it has to go right. And the wonderful thing is we've got a traffic cop who's standing there that's going to direct traffic. And this officer's name is Amy, Officer Amy G. Dalla. That's her full name. First name, middle initial, and last name, Amy G. Dalla. Amy is standing at the intersection. And when she feels that you are safe, then she directs all the information up to your PFC, your prefrontal cortex. When she feels that you are in danger, that you are not safe, that you are facing an enemy, the sound you hear at 2:30 in the morning, she sends all the information to your hindbrain. Your hindbrain takes over the actions, takes over the decision-making for your brain. And what happens all day long, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, is Amy shifts back and forth your brain between executive state and survival state. Now, to give you a little bit better example of what is going on or how we discovered this. I say we, like I had some involvement. I didn't. I'm just a neuroscience researcher. Dr. Lieberman out of Stanford University in 2007, he put a patient into a functional MRI machine. And this functional MRI machine allowed them to be able to see real time what was happening inside the brain when they showed the patient pictures and when they asked them questions. So they shove a patient into the functional MRI machine and they show them a picture of an angry person. Immediately, what happened was two things simultaneously. The PFC, put your hand on your forehead like you're feeling if you have a fever. Remember your PFC, and you can relax. Your PFC shut off electrically like a circuit breaker had been tripped. A light switch had been turned off. And the hindbrain became active. Amy was active, the amygdala. So the PFC is shut off, the hindbrain is active, and Amy is sending all the information to the hindbrain, and the hindbrain takes over the decision-making for the entire brain and body. It also did other things when that happened. The pulse rate increased. Adrenaline was released into the system, norepinephrine, epinephrine, along with other neurotransmitters. It's called a sympathetic nervous system response. Pupils dilate. Respiratory rate increases. Blood pressure increases. Just from watching a picture, a photograph, not a real threat. Here's the important part. Not a real threat, a perceived threat. And that's what's known as survival state, because we're operating in a survival state, a survival mode in our brain and our body. Now, here's the fascinating part. They asked the patient that was in the MRI, "What do you see?" And the patient said, "I see an angry person." And the brain shifted states. Amy calmed down. The hindbrain powered down. The PFC powered back up. And Lieberman was like, whoa. Let's show him another picture. So they showed him a picture of a sinking ship, a ship in heavy seas. Immediately, bam, back into a sympathetic nervous response, back into survival state. PFC shuts off like a light switch. And they asked the patient, "What do you see?" "I see a sinking ship." Boom, shifted back. Not as quick. It's a light switch and a dimmer switch. To go into survival state, it's instantaneous, faster than I can snap my fingers. To go into an executive state, it's more like a dimmer switch coming back on. But the shift is immediate. The PFC comes back on. Amy calms down. And they did this again and again and again. Again, the important part is twofold. Number one, it was a perceived threat. Number two, when the patient labeled, and this is where we get the term affect labeling, sometimes it's referred to as emotional labeling. We know that labeling an emotion or a fear quiets the fear center of the brain, Amy, and brings the PFC back online. Now, I want you to think about this situation. Everybody's experienced this. But I want you to think back, maybe the last time you were in a conflict situation. You were in conflict with somebody, and 10, 15, 20 minutes later after you're away from that conflict, you realized, oh, I could have said this. This would have been a really great comeback to have. Why can't I think of that in the moment? I wish I would have said it back then. It would have been great. Well, the reason you can't think of it in the moment is you literally can't think. You can't access memory. You can't be creative. You can't problem solve. You can't come up with these really great things to say because your PFC is shut down. You're in conflict. Automatically, when you think about it, that's danger. You're dealing with an enemy as far as Amy is concerned, and that means you're in survival state. Hindbrain is active, and PFC is shut down. Your ability to be creative, to problem solve, to think rationally and logically is literally shut off. Let me give you another example. Almost every child, you growing up, or you as a parent, have had a child come up to you and say, or you said to your parents, Mom, Dad, I'm bored. Now, I don't know about you, but when I said that as a child, I got told things like, well, clearly you haven't done your homework. Clearly you need to go outside and play and figure out something better to do. I haven't given you enough chores, or you haven't done your chores. I got all these things that were not helpful because what I was saying in Czechoslovakian, so I understand my parents not understanding it, but from here on out, I'm going to be a Czechoslovakian interpreter because that's what kids are speaking. Sounds a lot like English, or Vlad, perhaps Russian, but they're actually speaking Czechoslovakian. This is what they're saying to you. Mom, Dad, my brain isn't working and I need your help. Now, I want you to stop and think about that for a moment. Your initial reaction of maybe your parents or maybe you have had when a child comes up and goes, I'm bored, usually is one of frustration, irritation. Certainly not the response that if they walked up to you and said, and you had heard properly, my brain isn't working and I need help. That generates a compassionate response. Now, a quick funny story, personal story is I was in North Carolina on the Outer Banks Islands. We were visiting some friends. My wife, who teaches with me, was in the room. She's over to the side with her girlfriends, and I'm doing dishes so that they can spend some time together. And one of the girls, her 8-year-old grandson, whose name is Maverick, yeah, as in Top Gun, his dad's a little bit wacky, but Maverick comes over. He's 8 years old, and I'm drying dishes, and Maverick comes up to me and he goes, Carrie, I'm bored. And I looked over at Diane because I'm figuring she's pranking me. I figured she gave Maverick $5, went over and said, go say this to Carrie. I looked over and she wasn't. It was genuine. So here's how I handled the situation, how I recommend you handle the situation in the future. Here, my brain isn't working. I need some help. So I looked at Maverick and that's what I told him. I said, hey, buddy, it's okay. Your brain is messing with you right now. It's not doing what it should do. Tell you what, I'm going to finish drying this dish. I'm going to put it away, and then we're going to go outside in the backyard and play. How's that sound? And he lit up like a brightest light, and he's like, yeah, okay. Because what I did is I told him I understood what was going on. I gave him a definitive time frame for when we were going to take care of it and what we were going to do to take care of it. What I did is I told his Amy, I'm not an enemy, and I'm going to help you. I understand you, is ultimately the message that he got. And true to my word, I finished drying that dish, put it up, said, let's head out in the backyard, buddy. And he was just happy as an 8-year-old can be. But how you hear that message, you hear it with frustration, irritation, or you hear it with compassion, makes all the difference in how you handle that situation. And quite frankly, your relationship moving forward with your child or somebody else's child. So this whole concept of executive state and survival state, you need to understand that research shows us we spend 70 to 80% of our life in survival state. Dr. Daniel Goleman coined the term amygdala hijack. And he said amygdala hijack, which is survival state, but at a high level. Amygdala hijack is focused by something of intense emotion and usually end up saying or doing something that you feel bad about later or you have to apologize for later. That is a description of how I use the analogy of Officer Amy G. Dallas standing at an intersection directing traffic, your brain shifting from executive state to survival state. And amygdala hijack is a negative emotional state. Survival state, a negative emotional state. Fear, anger, frustration, overwhelm, boredom. Executive state is a positive emotional state. Happiness, joy, gratitude, curiosity. Now, when we try and figure out, am I executive state or am I in survival state? All you have to do is look at positive emotions or negative emotions. Let me give you another visual for this. I want you to picture a safe house. Now, that picture is a little bit small, so let's blow it up a little bit, make it larger. I want you to think for just a moment. And Vlad and Juan, I'm going to ask the two of you to unmute yourselves, and I'd like you to do me a favor and just tell me, what emotions do you think these children, these parents, this family is experiencing?
Delight.
Delight. That's a great descriptor. Very granular.
Joy.
Joy. What else?
Excitement.
Excitement. Good. You can see the little boy, he's got a big old grin on his face. So does the little girl.
Yeah. Fun.
What was that again?
Fun.
Fun. Yes.
Connectedness.
Again, say again, Vlad.
Connectedness.
Connectedness. Again, another positive emotion. Every single emotion that you named off, positive emotions. Now, let's look on the other side of the street. And we're going to look at the dope house. Now, every neighborhood has one of these. And you can remember dope house by the acronym drama, overwhelm, pessimism, ego, enraged. Vlad, Juan, what emotions for the people that live inside this house? The one where the cops are getting called to it all the time so well that when they hear the address 123 Main Street, they go, oh, yep, I know exactly what we're going back there for. The people who have motorcycles parked on the front lawn, if they could find them in the tall weeds, the cars drive up, they stay for 30 seconds to a minute and drive away, and neighbors are calling in loud music complaints and loud party complaints. Drug use is going on. That's why the cars only stay in 30 seconds to a minute. They're doing a narcotics transaction and they're leaving. What emotions do you think the people living inside this house, what do you think they're feeling?
The emotions that come to mind are fear, anger, resentment, fury.
Fear, anger, resentment, fury. Excellent. Vlad?
I would say maybe disappointment, maybe frustration, feeling of being treated unfairly. How can you call it? Something like being mistreated.
Disappointment, frustration, being mistreated.
Disconnection, feeling of disconnection or distraught.
Oh, disconnection.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now I want to pause for just a moment, and I want to bring attention to something that you may or may not have noticed. When I asked you about the safe house, the family, each of you gave one word. And then a second. Juan, you rattled off 4. Vlad, you rattled off 3. Boom, boom, boom. Isn't it interesting that we can find this negativity so much faster than we can the positivity? Well, don't feel bad. I'm going to show you some examples of this, but we are hardwired for negativity. Our brains have a 9-to-1 negative bias. Now, you may not have heard how that happened, but I happen to know how that occurred in our evolutionary history. How is it that we came to have a 9-to-1 negative bias? Here's how it happened. One day, there were 2 cavemen walking down the road. One was an optimist, one was a pessimist, and they came upon a woolly mammoth. And the optimist said, "We can take him." And the pessimist said, "No, we can't." And he began to tie his sandal. He bent over, kneeled down to start tying his sandal. And the optimist, who was getting ready to take on the woolly mammoth, said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm getting ready to outrun you." He didn't have to outrun the woolly mammoth. He just had to outrun the optimist. So that's how we ended up being a bunch of pessimists, why we have a 9-to-1 negative bias. And the reality is it's based on who survived. When we look for danger, when we look for things that can hurt us, we tend to be safer. So Amy, through centuries, has given us the ability to stay alive, because this ability to look for danger, to look for enemies, to look for things that can hurt us is so finely tuned. Yet today we face less physical dangers than in the history of humanity, and more perceived dangers. Watch the evening news. You see the wildfires in California. I live in California. Guess what? Those fires are nowhere near where I live, but people send me text messages and call me up and go, Carrie, do you need any help? No. Why do you think I need help? Well, you got those fires. Are you evacuating? Those fires are a solid 3 hours and 90 miles away from me. 3 hours driving time, 90 miles. Should be a lot less time driving time. They're of no danger to me. Now, it doesn't mean something can't pop up this afternoon, but right now, the danger that you're perceiving I'm in, and why you're calling me up going, Carrie, do you need any help? Which is survival state. You think I need help. That's a negative emotional state. You're worried about me. You're concerned about me. You have fear for my safety. By the way, those things rattle off right away because we have this negative bias. We tend to be in survival state. We're in survival state 70 to 80% of our life. That's why these things come to us so easy. So this is what Amy does. Now, here's the interesting thing. You'll notice that on one side of the street, physically is the safe house. Physically, the dope house is on the other side. And what that tells us, and the reason I use this illustration, is your brain cannot be in survival state and executive state at the same time. You have to cross the street to be in one state, or across the street to be in the other. So the old age riddle, why did the chicken cross the road? The answer is to get into executive state. You can't be on the same side of the street at the same time. And who wants to be in survival state? That's no fun. Drama, overwhelm, pessimism, ego, negative emotional state. That's not where I want to be. But the challenge is, if we're there 70 to 80% of our life, how do we get out of survival state and into executive state ourselves? And then how do we reach inside somebody's head and flip a switch and get them into executive state? Those are questions that we'll be answering today. I'm going to give you at least one tool, probably a couple, because I'm feeling generous, but at least one tool to be able to shift yourself. And the great thing is, I'll show you how to shift someone else as well. But as we look at this whole thing about executive state and survival state as a foundation, the reality is this: these emotions that you described the folks in the dope house as having, the disappointment, the fear, the anger, the frustration, the overwhelm, the disconnection, you'll notice that there's not just one emotion present, and rarely are there just one emotion. Now, there might be a primary one. There might be one that overwhelms everything else, but it's like this cake. By the way, this is from a restaurant. There's a restaurant chain called the Claim Jumper. It's an 1849ers gold rush in the USA themed restaurant. This cake is called a mother load cake. As you see, it fills an entire plate. It could feed 5, 6 people. It is 7 layers of cake and icing, cake and icing, cake and icing. And that's the way emotions are. But what is at the bottom, the base layer of cake, every single time, anytime there's conflict, is fear. Fear is the root of all conflict. And when you think about it, whenever you see conflict, there's always fear. Now, not necessarily just one fear, maybe like the cake with layers of emotions, there might be layers of fears. There can be more than one fear. And, I use this graphic because a friend of mine who's a personal injury attorney once told me, you know what, Carrie, nobody ever got a speeding ticket going to a dentist appointment. It was one of the funniest things I ever heard. And he told me that when I was still a cop. And when you think about it, fears that we have at the dentist, there's multiple fears. I was at the dentist this morning, had a deep cleaning done. It was not pleasant. So on my way to the dentist, I was thinking about this graphic, thinking about this training we're going to be doing today. And I was thinking, well, what do people have to be afraid of at the dentist? So I'm going to ask you, Juan, and then you, Vlad, next. When you think about going to the dentist, and all of us have been several times, what are you worried about? What are your fears? Juan, what about you?
Fear of pain, needles, the sound of the drill, the drill slipping and getting into something else, getting into a jaw or that kind of thing.
Maybe going a little bit too deep and literally touching a nerve.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
The skill of the dentist, fearing the dentist is just out of dental school and not very good yet. Maybe they graduated at the bottom of their class. Maybe they graduated at the top. What do we call the person who graduates at the top of their class? Doctor. What do we call the person who graduates at the bottom of the class? Doctor. So we never ask our dentist, by the way, where were you in your class and how many people were in it? We just know that they're a dentist. Vlad, what about you? What kind of fears do you think of when you go to the dentist?
Well, yeah, I guess that comes to my comes to my experience when I was in school. And when I was in school, there was no what is that? The freezing anesthesia.
Yeah.
And the drills were quite different. There was no cooling, so it's getting hot in your mouth. You see like the smoke is coming out of your mouth. So
Yeah.
I think all the fears of dentists actually were there when I was young, and I hated that. And it was anesthesia was there just to pull the tooth, right? So, but if it comes to fix the tooth, there has never been any anesthesia. So, that, and of course, it's not pleasant experience. So I think there's more fear coming from the childhood rather than the real fear that or real pain that I experience. So it kind of fades away now. It's much less than before, but it was funny to hear that nobody's getting a ticket when going to dentist. It's like so funny to hear that nobody's actually speeding to go to dentist,
Right.
which could be kind of counterintuitive, because if you're missing your appointment, you gotta be actually maybe increase the speed of your car to make it. But funny enough, people would rather give up the appointment at the dentist rather than going a little faster.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I remember seeing the smoke from when I was a kid. And one of my coaches said one time, the root of all human suffering comes from two places: memories and anticipation. Memories and anticipation. Vlad, you just talked about the memories of how bad it was going to the dentist as a child. Now, sometimes that still kicks in a little bit. Human suffering. Anticipation of the pain that you're going to have when you get to the office. Human suffering. And all we're doing, we're just driving there. The ability to be in the present, not in the past, which is regret, not in the future, which is anticipation of negativity. the ability to stay fully present in the situation helps relieve us from those two things, the memories and the anticipation. Now, moving on to another concept. We all have an addiction. I want you to think about that. Every single person in the world has an addiction, and it is the same addiction. It crosses every boundary. It does not matter where you were born in the world, does not matter how much money you have, does not matter what you identify as. That addiction is to be understood. Now, here's the beautiful thing. When we can convey to somebody that we understand them, and it can't be, oh, I understand you. I totally get it. Because first of all, you just made it all about you because you said, I totally understand. I get it, which you can't totally understand it. From your perspective, from your perception, you can, but not until you look at it from their perspective. And even then, you won't totally understand. You won't totally get it because each person's experience in this world is different. That's the beauty of being human. That's the beauty of being alive, is the human experience. And for each one of us, it is different. Even when we are seeing someone go through the same thing that we've gone through. You know, I'm reminded of that because my sister-in-law last week passed away. She had cancer. She beat it. It came back. She went into hospice like my other sister-in-law, like my father. I was my father's full-time caretaker for his last 3 months. I've been through the hospice experience. I've watched people die. I've held their hands when they've died more times than I can count. When I worked as an emergency room technician, as a firefighter EMT, working the county ambulance, and as a police officer. And with my own family members, more people than I can count, I've watched die and been with them. And yet, when Lori died, it was still different. It was different for her husband than it was for my brother when his wife passed away. It was different than my mom when my dad passed away. My mom's experience when my dad died was different than my experience when my dad died. Because we're all unique. We come from different perceptions and perspectives. Can you convey to someone that you understand what they're going through? Not completely, not totally, but you understand them. I'm going to show you how to do that. If you use something that I've created called the empathy trifecta, and the empathy trifecta is so simple to do, but it's so overlooked. It involves deep listening, not active listening. Active listening, I don't like that term. And here's why I don't like it. Because people were told, well, what does active listening look like? Well, it means you're going to cover your mouth so you don't speak. You're going to nod your head. You're going to go, oh, yeah, okay. You're going to make these noises, these grunts, these head body motions that indicate you're listening. But all the while, what you're doing is, while they're talking, you're waiting to talk. You're forming a response to what they're saying. You're getting your arguments ready. You're not really listening. I teach something that I call deep listening. And deep listening is this. It's the empathy trifecta. You're listening first, and that's why it's in order. It's the order in which you do this. And if you follow this process, you will not only be able to have empathy for the other person, but you'll be able to convey it better. First, you listen for the emotions, not to the actual words, because their words might trigger you, especially if it's a child saying things, Dad, I hate you. Mom, I don't love you. You're so unfair to me. You never help me. You never give me anything I want. And inside you're thinking, you have no idea the sacrifices I've had. Perception and perspective at work. Don't listen to the words as much as what are the emotions underneath the words. Then start figuring out what are the fears, because if fear is the root of all conflict and you're in conflict with somebody, or they're in conflict with somebody, you're the objective third party, you're still listening for their emotions, you're still listening for their fears, whether or not you're the one in conflict with them or not, because out of the emotions, out of the fears, their values are revealed. Now, a friend came to me with a really unique family situation, except it's not really unique. One of the family members, we'll call him Frank, had a house, and he let his sister live in it, Sarah, and her family. And because she was family, he let her live there for a very low rent, lower than he would have gotten at market value for a very long time. There ended up being some damage done to the house. I think it was a fire, if I'm not mistaken. But the house was damaged, and so Sarah had to move out. Sarah and her husband had to move out. And around the same time that Frank is getting the house repaired, he started to run into some financial situations, partly because of the house repairs, partly because of things that were going on that had nothing to do with Sarah and her family. When the house got repaired, Sarah's thinking, well, we're just going to move back in. Everything's hunky-dory. And the brother said, hey, I need to raise the rent, because he needed to have more income. And in a moment, I'm going to explain why this communication between Frank and Sarah. And I don't know all of the details, but what I do know of, I'm going to show you a graphic, an illustration that explains, that will let you know in 17 milliseconds, which, by the way, the reason I use graphics like this, your brain processes it in 17 milliseconds. I don't know if you knew that or not, but that's why it's important. And 65% of people in the world are visual. It's a preference they have. It's not mandatory. It's not the only way they take in information. It's just a preference. 30% are auditory. And that's why we combine the speaking and the visuals. That's 95% of the public. 5% are kinesthetic, touchy-feely, hard to do over Zoom virtual world. But what I had you do for you kinesthetic people, the touchy-feely people, guess what? I had you put your hand on your forehead and touch the knot and slide into the notch, and then touch where Amy is. And that helps you really remember your PFC, your hindbrain, and Amy, the fear center of your brain. It helps you draw a correlation to those things. For those of you who are visual, you saw me do it. You did it. It helps you visually understand it. And auditorily, we were describing it, hitting all three preferences of how all 100% of the public likes to take in information. Let me give you another visual here. Before we leave this, emotions, fears, the values that are revealed out of it. As we talk with people, this is what's referred to as an emotions wheel. There's several different versions of this out there. And if you're interested in having a copy, I have two different ones. This is just one. I want you to take just a quick look at this. I'll get you that copy of the emotions wheel. I'll let you know how to get that before we're done today. But I want you to look at something here. I want you to find the word happy. It's on the right-hand side. And I want you to take happy, and I want you to look at the word above it, surprised, because it's closely related to happy, but different. And I want you to take and see how big that pie wedge is for happy. Now, you notice as you go from the center to the outer rings that there's more words, there's more adjectives, there's more emotions, and it becomes more granular. Vlad, I used that term with you earlier. One of the descriptors for the safe house, I said that's very granular. Being granular is on the outer part. I want you to picture being at the ocean. I want you to picture looking with your back to the ocean, looking at the shore, and you may see some very big rocks. They might be boulders. And then as you shift your gaze, in fact, close your eyes, and I want you to imagine you're at the shore of the ocean, and the waves are coming in and crashing behind you. Maybe you're feeling a little bit of the spray, the waves are crashing so hard. And you're looking, your eyes are closed right now, but I want you to imagine looking at boulders on the shore. And then I want you to shift your gaze, turning your head, turning your whole body. And you start to see the boulders become rocks. Then they become pebbles. And as you look toward the water, you see they become sand. And the sand is very granular. It's tiny bits of sand. That boulder on the shore is the center of the wheel. The grains of sand, the granularity, the small pieces, that's the sand on the shore that the waves are lapping up on. Why don't you go ahead and open your eyes? The reason I had you do that exercise is, number one, you form these visuals in your head and you understand granularity moving from the center of the wheel to the outside. We want to be as granular as possible. No one likes to walk on hard rocks. It's barefoot. It's painful. You'd much rather walk on sand that's soft, feels better on your feet. That's where we want to be, is the outside of the wheel. Because when we say to somebody, you're mad, or you're sad, or you're disgusted, that's good. That's not bad. It's not bad at all. But if we can say you're shocked, sounds like you're revolted by that. It sounds like you're feeling pressured. Sounds like you're feeling disorganized. Those are very descriptive, very granular. And we indicate to people a greater understanding of what the emotions are. Now, I volunteer 66 hours a month on 2 different suicide hotlines. One of them is the nationwide 988 capture line. I do that for 40 hours a month. I said 66, I meant 56, excuse me. 56 hours a month. For 16 hours a month, I do a suicide hotline that's dedicated to law enforcement officers only. It's called copline.org. And it's for law enforcement officers, active or retired, and their family members. It's dedicated to them. The only people that staff that line are retired law enforcement officers. So we understand what the officers, the deputies, and their families are going through. The 988, whether I'm on that or whether I'm on the cop line, I always have this and the other emotions wheel with me. I never do a shift without, and I use this when I'm talking to a caller and they're describing things. I'm looking, what is the granular wording? What are the emotions that they're feeling? What are the fears that they're having? What are the values that are revealed by both those emotions and those fears? Because when I am able to label those things, remember, labeling came out of the Lieberman study. We knew before the Lieberman study, as a quick aside, we knew the phrase "name it to tame it." We knew it worked. We knew when we talked about people's emotions and people's fears, we knew that they calmed down. We just didn't know why. Now we have neuroscience proof and understanding of why that happens. How we shift someone from survival state to executive state, one of the great ways is by labeling, by saying, it sounds like, or it seems like you're really shocked by that. Sounds like you're disappointed. Sounds like you're really hesitant. It seems like you're feeling unfocused. And I always recommend what we call qualified labels. Qualified because it looks like, it sounds like, it feels like. Now remember, visual, it looks like; auditory, sounds like; kinesthetic, feels like. But rather than guessing which one somebody's preference for, use the one that's 100% going to appeal to everybody, which is it seems like. It seems like you're feeling confused. It seems like you're feeling a lot of grief. Or maybe just a lot of shock. If you say it seems like, you cannot go wrong. Because the great thing is, if you're wrong, they will correct you. And when they correct you, you repeat it back. So they say, well, no. It's not that I'm feeling grief. I'm feeling like I don't have any power. And you say, seems like you're feeling powerless. Yeah, that's it. Well, guess what? They labeled themselves and you labeled them. Double whammy. And you automatically start to shift them toward executive state just by labeling. Remember, I told you I was going to give you a couple tools. That's one of them. It's very, very powerful to label their emotions, label their fears, label the values that are revealed out of that. Now I'm going to move on quickly because we're past the top of the hour. We got a little bit of a late start, so we'll finish up. Remember, I told you there was going to be the cake, the iceberg, and the 3 lives. Here's the iceberg. How much of the iceberg is above the water? On average, about 10%. On average, about 10%. I know that there's going to be some iceberg expert out there. It's going to be, well, Carrie, it's actually 9 to 13%. Yeah, about 10%. Now, let me bring in, that means 90% of the iceberg is below the water. 90% is underneath. It's not visible. Now, let's bring in this. I'm going to jump straight to here. The 3 lives. The public life, the private life, and the secret life. The public life is what we post on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook. My life is great. My wife is great. My husband's great. My job is great. I'm on vacation. My business is wonderful. It's growing all the time. Or at the opposite end of the spectrum, Fluffy went over the Rainbow Bridge 10 years ago, and I miss my childhood pet every day. It's one end of the spectrum or the other. Nobody ever posts on there, you know what, I screwed up today. I didn't take out the trash cans for about the 13th time, and my wife is just livid with me. Nobody ever posts, I said something so rude to my sister that I don't know if she'll ever forgive me. Or I can't believe I just told my mom to F off over a text message because she wasn't listening to me. I told my mom today that she doesn't do anything for me, even though she's like the one that gave birth to me, and I'm here because of her. Nobody ever posts that stuff, but that is a private life. You're below the water. The next 80%, the 80-20 rule is amazing how much it applies in different areas. 10% is public life. 10% is secret life. 80% is private life. When you go down the iceberg and you start diving into what's going on with people, I'm going to teach you 2 phrases today to use that work no matter what is said to you. When you go down the iceberg in the private life, that is where trust is created. Because here's what happens today. The vast majority of conversations are surface level. I call them bus bench conversations, while you're waiting for the bus conversation you have, or elevator, you step on an elevator and it's an elevator conversation. How you doing? Oh, I'm good. Yeah. Yeah. My week is going great. Oh, cool. All right. Well, you take care. Okay. Here, I'm getting off of my floor. Or, whoa, the 928 bus is here. I gotta go. Nice chatting with you. And all you did was talk about top of the iceberg public life stuff. You didn't get into the private life because you wouldn't. It's not appropriate in those moments. But when it is appropriate, when people need a listening ear, when they say something and you think to yourself, wow, tell me more about that. Tell me more. Tell me more. You can keep on saying that again and again. The other phrase that you can use besides tell me more is, wow, what was that like for you? Wow, what was that like for you? I was in Las Vegas last week, Friday afternoon, and I was getting ready to leave. I was at a conference, EMS World. I spoke there about suicide prevention. And I stopped in one of my favorite restaurants, and I went in to wash my hands. And the bathroom attendant was in there. And I did something I've been doing for years now. Everybody ignores the bathroom attendant. I'm not talking the one at the nightclub that sprays cologne on you and, gives you breath mints and you tip them $1. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking the bathroom attendant who's in there cleaning up the toilet paper pieces that fall on the floor and people don't bother to pick up, and the water that's sprayed everywhere when people are washing their hands and spots all over the mirror, mopping the floor from people miss the toilet. Not a great job. So here's what I do. Regardless of the condition of that bathroom, I always thank them for their hard work. And when it looks exceptionally well, I always make an extra point about mentioning that too. So here's my standard phrase. Hey, I just want to take a moment and thank you for your hard work, because this is not an easy job. And this place looks really good. You can tell you're working hard. Thank you. A genuine gratitude. Because guess what I'm doing with that person? I'm reaching inside their brain. I'm flipping a switch, because you cannot be in gratitude and that's giving it or receiving it. You cannot be in gratitude and in survival state at the same time. Your brain does not allow it. You also cannot be in curiosity and be in survival state at the same time. Your brain does not allow that either. Gratitude, curiosity, very powerful ways of shifting yourself out of survival state and shifting another person. I gave you labeling emotions, fears, and values, labeling, gratitude, and curiosity. I ended up having a 20-minute conversation with this bathroom attendant. He's 36 years old. Amazing young man, amazing attitude about life. He's actually going to be a guest on the podcast that I host. The podcast is called De-Escalation Conversations. You can find it at our website, theidea.world. Yes, I know it's not .com.org, it's .world, theidea.world/podcast. He's going to be a guest in a couple of weeks on the podcast. I was fascinated with this young man. And at one point, I asked him, I said, how did you come to have the attitude toward life that you do? And he said, well, I nearly froze over in Alaska. We're in Vegas. He doesn't look like he's ever been to Alaska. Turns out he was a wilderness guide in Alaska. And he told me the story about how he almost died and how he saved himself. And I won't give a spoiler to it, but I'll just say that the theme of this interview is going to be caterpillar to butterfly. Literally caterpillar to butterfly. And he said, ever since then, he said, I changed. He was 29 at the time. He's 36 now, 7 years ago. I got into that conversation. I discovered this fascinating young man who has an amazing attitude and who I learned things from in the bathroom of the Wynn Casino, because I complimented him for all the hard work he's doing keeping the bathroom clean. Boom. Give gratitude and you get wonderful gifts. Dive into their private life. I asked him again and again, tell me more about that. What was that like for you? Tell me more. There's got to be more to that story. What was that like? That was my half of the conversation. Those two questions and variations, slight variations, all the way through. So let's reflect back just briefly, because we've covered a lot of ground here. We talked about the executive and survival states. We talked about the cake, identifying the emotions and the fears. Talked about going beneath the surface on the iceberg into the private life. And the 3 lives. All of us live them. And what do we do with that? Now, I'll just say this on the secret life, because there's somebody out there going, Carrie, you didn't talk about the secret life. I'll only say this about the secret life. You only reveal your secret life, the bottom 10% of the iceberg, to one, maybe just a couple people in your life, and they're probably a priest or a counselor. maybe the one, maybe two people in your life that you trust completely, that you can tell them anything and they won't judge you. They won't think badly of you, because the secret life are the thoughts that we have, that we think if someone knew I thought that, they wouldn't like me. If Carrie heard me ever say that, or that I had said it, or that I had even just thought it, he'd end the Zoom, he'd kick me out of the room. Or maybe it's something that you've done in the past. That's your secret life. You don't reveal that to anybody because they would judge you, is ultimately it. And the only way you'll ever reveal that to anybody is that you trust them completely. And so that's the perfect example of, as we go down the iceberg, the further you go down, the more trust is created. I hope that something that we've covered today is going to be beneficial to you. Because as we think about the perception and the perspective, we think about executive state and survival state, we think about why we communicate things, or why we say things, or why we don't, we see very quickly why people will think one thing, because they don't have the whole story. They're not looking through the lens of the other person. And that person may not reveal that lens that they're looking through because it's deeply private, or maybe in their secret life, and they don't want to reveal it. They have their public facade. And when anything is different from that, what they portray to other people suddenly shatters. And the reality is, most of our public life is a facade, a lot of times. If you have questions about anything that we've talked about today, if you'd like to be able to discuss it, or be able to work through some things that you think, you know what, these tools can help, but I need a little bit more information, all you have to do is go to our website, theidea.world, and I'll be happy. You can fill out the contact form, say, hey, I'd like Carrie to talk to me. I'd like to have a short meeting. So you can go to our website, fill out the contact form, and you'll be able to know immediately how to reach me through that. And then I also promised you the emotions wheel. So give me just a moment, and I'm going to tell you exactly how to get that. You go to, this is going to be a really tough one, theidea.world / you guessed it, emotions. Theidea.world / emotions. And you can download in a PDF, the emotions wheel. 2 versions, because sometimes one fits the situation that you're dealing with a little bit better. Before we end this session of Communicate Using Science, Not Speculation, brought to you by IDEA, the International De-Escalation Association, I wanted to open it up to Juan and then Vlad. Do you have any questions about anything that we've talked about today, or any clarifications, any resources that you would like that you're not sure about how to get to? Juan?
Kerry, not so much questions, because the way you've laid it out, it's those images are etched in my mind, and you've given me a bit of a map that, it's not as though I have to do a great lot of thought if I'm on one side is people playing in the backyard and other people in the dope house. It's crystal clear. As far as the takeaways, using the labeling of seems like, and tell me more, and wow, what was that like? It's sort of, and gratitude and curiosity, like as tools that I can use. They Yeah. I feel it's only a matter of practicing, and I'll be speaking with some people in the near future, and I feel like I've got both a map and some things to do. Yeah.
Excellent. And
Yeah.
I love what you said. You're dead on right. It's a matter of practicing. It's a matter of getting used to it. It's a matter of literally stopping yourself from the amygdala hijack, pulling yourself back just a little bit, but just like any skill. Because I bet you drive a car, there's times that you've gone from one place to another. You, like if you're headed home, you pull into your driveway, you look around, you're like, wow, I don't even know how I got here, but I'm here. Because you're on autopilot. These are neural pathways that have been myelinated. They have been built up so they carry more and more data, and it becomes what's commonly referred to as muscle memory. Your brain is taking in, it's operating on the subconscious, unconscious, and non-conscious levels. Consciously, Amy is just looking out for the dangers, and as long as there's none that pop up, you get home and you pull into your driveway and you're not sure how you got there. But Amy was watching out for you the entire time. That's a beautiful thing. Almost like a little angel on your shoulder, ready to whisper in danger, or that little robot from Lost in Space, danger, Will Robinson.
Yeah.
Sorry, I make a lot of old TV show analogies. Vlad, thank you. Thank you for that one. Vlad, what about you? Any questions or comments?
Yeah, and this is absolutely true that in many cases, what you want to do could be not the ideal thing to do. So, for example, if somebody comes to you and says, well, Kerry, what you say is totally wrong. This doesn't make sense at all. What your natural inclination to say is like, wait a second, I was logical. I show you this, I show you that. You start to defend yourself, but this is this is not what you actually need to do, because it's kind of like reacting to their negativity and reacting to, essentially you need to understand beyond the words, you understand why they actually being so aggressive. You need to understand where they're coming from, what the fear, the emotions, the fear, and the values are. So from this perspective, maybe it didn't fit in within their values. Maybe they have a fear of kind of shaken personal mindset, personal understanding. Maybe they are feeling uncomfortable that they doing something else, and that's why they are attacking you. But kind of trying to defend yourself in the situation is natural for many people, but not the optimal. So how many different situations or maybe types of the situations that you can get into to explain of how can we actually do that hijacking of the amygdala to say, well, that's not the time to be defensive right now, and how can we practice that? How can we actually overcome that? Maybe there's some maybe some of the police officer training recommend in their training, how to do that. How if somebody's pull a gun and point at you, what is the how not to run from the bear, right? So so to speak. What do you think about it?
Well, if there's roughly 8 billion people in the world, that means there's at least 8 billion situations that can come up, and what I can do is give some guidelines on that. And the first thing is this: thinking about it in advance. You're going to have conflict. Now, this is different than you being in the shower, getting ready to go to a meeting or to work, and you're showering. And you're like, okay, I know my boss is going to say this, and I'm going to say this. And I mean, how many conversations have you played out in your head? I'll say this, and she'll say that, and then I'll say this, and then the conversation never happens. How much time have we wasted during a drive into a meeting or work, or before a family event. Oh, I know Uncle George. Yeah. Uncle George always gets drunk and he always starts talking politics, or Uncle George doesn't end up coming to Thanksgiving dinner because some other reason. And you spend all this time preparing mentally to defend yourself. By the way, that's Amy overworking, going enemy, danger, danger. Got to prepare for this. Create a fortress around you. God, we waste so much time and energy and effort in life. But when we are in conflict, if the very first thing that you do is you go, what's the fear? Now, remember, I said emotions, fears, values, but if you identify, the very first thing that hits you in conflict is, what's their fear? So, Vlad, I love the example that you gave. Carrie, you know what? You're wrong on this. This is not it. You're being way too soft. You need if your child comes to you and says that they're bored, you need to be firm with them. Don't be raising any softies here. The generations have been too soft with helicopter parents, and we can already start to see what's the fear. Well, the fear is either for the population, the generations to come, and the world that they're going to have to live in as an older adult with all these misbehaving children running around who are too soft. Or maybe they're doubting their parenting skills. And if they accept what I said about, Dad, my brain isn't working and I need help, because they told their child, go out and do your chores, go do your homework, go find something fun to do, figure it out yourself. And they're feeling guilt over it. And so if I'm right, they were a bad parent. Maybe that's their fear. So when you're hit with this stuff, you're Amy 100% of the time. Unless you're, I don't know, maybe Gandhi or what's the guy? He's not the Pope, but he's the other guy that's like the Buddhist, Dalai Lama. Maybe you're the Dalai Lama. Maybe you're so dialed into, the higher purpose and all that stuff. Me, I'm just a knuckle dragging street cop who just tried to do his job. I'm nothing special. I just happened to read 28,000 research paper abstracts and figured some of this stuff out. I'm nothing special. I brought this stuff together and I dumbed it down to a 4th grade level because that's what I needed to be able to understand it. And that's where cops under stress and medics under stress and nurses under stress have to be, in firefighters, school teachers in the classroom under stress. It has to be at a 4th grade level so they can do it under those conditions. Because 100% of the time, you will flip into survival state. Now, how deep in survival state is about the level of conflict and how much that conflict means to you. If my brother comes to me and he's screaming and yelling at me, I'm probably going to go deeper into survival state than if you, Vlad, come screaming and yelling. No offense, Vlad, we're friends. We've met in person. We broke bread together. But I don't love you like I do my brother. So when my brother's angry with me and upset with me, that's going to hit me harder because it means more. So what I have to be able to do, I have to be able to drag myself back. And the preparation is critical in the understanding of, okay, what is my brother scared of? What's his fear? Is it even have to do with me? And the reality is it has nothing to do with me. It has to do with him. Because happy people do not attack you. Think about that for a moment. Happy people cannot and do not ever attack you. It's only unhappy people. And why are they unhappy? Well, it has to deal with them and their reactions to the situation. Now, they might place blame on you, but it's how they choose to react. My amazing granddaughter, Quinn, She's 22 months old. She turned and she hit me the other day in the face. I thought that little monster about broke my nose. Notice I called her a little monster. She's not. I'd do anything in the world for that child. I love her like I've loved almost no one else on this planet. You're not supposed to have your favorites, but I do. Here's the thing. I can get mad at her. Or I can go, oh, Quinn, don't hit Jeepa in the face. She didn't mean to hurt me. It's all in how I react to it. It's all in how I react. And so when my brother comes yelling and screaming and mad at me, it's not about me, even though he may think it is. It's not. It's about him, how he's reacting to the situation. So that helps me frame it. What's his fears? What are the emotions? What are his values revealed out of it? So you come to me and say, Carrie, I don't agree with anything that you said. You're completely wrong. The very first thing I'm going to say is, Vlad, that's not a problem. I'm going to diffuse the situation right up front. That's not a problem, Vlad. I'm curious. What is it that you think I'm wrong about? I'd like to understand what you're saying. And automatically that starts to relieve even more pressure. I'd like to understand what you're telling me. And you tell me, well, people just don't do that. You need to raise stronger children. Tell me more about that. I'm curious about that, because what I'm doing is I'm firing off his mirror neurons or your mirror neurons. I'm wrapping in curiosity. I can even say things like, Vlad, I'm so grateful that you came to me with this feedback. I'm grateful you're telling me these things because I've not heard this before. And I'm always wanting to make sure I'm right. So please tell me more. I'm grateful for you bringing this to me. Gratitude. I'm curious what I'm missing. Help me understand. There is no way you can stay mad at me for more than 90 seconds. Neuroscience proven. And the reality is, most of the time, when you do these techniques, help me understand. I'm curious. Thank you for this feedback. Thank you for telling me. Nobody else has bothered to tell me these things. Thank you. I am flipping your mirror neurons. We're practicing gratitude. We're practicing curiosity. I'm trying to understand you. I'm trying to meet your addiction, actively meeting your addiction to be understood. You can't stay mad at me. It's impossible. Brain doesn't allow it. It's not because I'm anything special. I'm just a knuckle dragging street cop trying to get through my career without doing something wrong. But I know this. I know when I try to understand you, it shifts everything. And now I understand the neuroscience behind it. This works on 99.9% of the public. The 0.1% is paranoid schizophrenics, because the wiring in the brain is completely different than anybody else's. But guess what? Let's talk about the 99%, because that's who we're dealing with. And if we have that random person that it doesn't work on, well, that's okay, because 99% of the people it did. I hope that helps both of you, and anybody listening to this masterclass helps you understand and be able to better prepare. Because here's what I do know. One of my dear friends, Gordon Graham, longtime law enforcement trainer and fire department trainer, funeral director trainer, and water department trainer. He covers all 4 of those sectors. He taught me what's predictable is preventable. What's predictable is you're going to have conflict in your life. What's preventable that I teach is having that go badly. What's predictable is preventable. What's predictable is you're going to have conflict. What's preventable is you handling it badly. Juan, Vladimir, thank you for sticking around for this masterclass. For those of you that are listening, remember theidea.world/emotions to get your copy of the Emotions Wheels. And until next time, please stay safe.